This morning, a busy week in politics, 48 hours from the Texas primary. Who's up? Who's down? And which races should you be watching Tuesday night? Texas Republicans condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and President Joe Biden's response. Is it more important to conservatives to bash Biden or criticize Putin? And like Republicans, Texas Democrats also think Ken Paxton is vulnerable right now. This morning, the top three on the left running for state attorney general, Rochelle Garza, Joe Jaworski, and Lee Merritt, tell us how they would change the office if elected.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. This is a busy week in politics. We are, of course, watching the updates from Ukraine. Tuesday night is President Biden's State of the Union speech, and we are now 48 hours away from the Texas primary. So with that, let's start with the latest political headlines here in Texas. A bombshell accusation a few days ago in a Texas courtroom. The former head of ERCOT, Bill Magnus there, testified that he was following the direction of Governor Greg Abbott when he ordered wholesale prices to stay at the maximum price cap for days during last February's freeze. The Houston Chronicle first reported this. Natural gas companies made billions from it. Governor Abbott's campaign refuted the testimony, though, saying Abbott simply told ERCOT to do what was needed to keep the power on. Turnout for early voting is trending lower than it has in previous midterms, and there could be a number of reasons why. Winter weather closed polling locations last week, and there is no big statewide race drawing people to the polls. We'll talk more about this in just a moment. And Kirk Watson is running for mayor of Austin again. Watson served as Austin's mayor from 97 to 2001, but he spent the last 13 years, as we know, in the Texas Senate. Watson now one of four candidates running to replace the incumbent mayor, Steve Adler, who is term limited out. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is likely headed for a runoff on Tuesday night. Three well-known Republicans running against him. We questioned each of them here on our program a little earlier this month. But this morning, we're doing the same thing for Democrats. The top three on the left here, Rochelle Garza, an attorney from South Texas. She leads in two recent polls. Joe Jaworski there, a Houston attorney and former mayor of Galveston. And Lee Merritt, who has made a name for himself defending victims of police brutality. We always begin alphabetically, which means Rochelle Garza is up first. Ms. Garza, welcome, and we appreciate the time. I want to ask you about a lot of the things you advocate for, like legalizing cannabis, immigration, the border, things like that. Those things would likely require legislative action. What do you think an attorney general, if elected, could do to impact those issues?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. An attorney general has the ability to advocate and use the power of the office to ensure that we go in the right direction. The attorney general can issue opinions, can advocate, as I mentioned, and litigate to further some of these issues that are important to Texans.
One of the other things that you're talking about putting a stop to is the border wall that Governor Abbott is putting together, and Operation Lone Star, which we've heard National Guard soldiers saying that there's no real mission down there and they're having a lot of issues on that. Exactly how, though, would you put a stop to all this as Attorney General?
Look, I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. I'm the only candidate on the Democratic side that is from the border region. I know the region very intimately. I've practiced immigration law. I've worked with children, hundreds of children and families in the issue of immigration. I recognize that these programs that we've got, the Operation Lone Star, building the border wall, are not helpful. They're failures. We experience a lot of flooding in South Texas, and the border wall would exacerbate those issues in addition to just being wasteful. So as Attorney General, I would advocate for a more humane immigration system based on my knowledge and experience in working on these issues.
Let's say you win the primary and advance on to the November election. Paxton, as you know, is loaded with cash in comparison to Democrats. He has, I think $7.5 million now. The GOP is outraising Dems 3-1. We saw a poll the other day that shows that Abbott is 10 points ahead of Beto at the top of the ticket. How do you compete against that?
Look, we have an opportunity to unseat him because he only won by 0.6 back in 2018. The demographics of the state have changed significantly over the last 4 years, and Texans are responding to that. I think it's time that we have representation that understands the plight of Texas families, and because Ken Paxton doesn't. And I believe that what I've been able to accomplish in the last 3 months in terms of building a broad coalition of folks across the state, folks across the nation, including Emily's List and Latino Victory Fund, and all of these national organizations that are paying attention to Texas and this race in particular, I know that we can take him on and we can beat him.
If elected, first day on the job, what's your priority?
I mean, there's a lot of cleanup we've got to do, but I really want to make sure that we take it back to basics and that we focus on improving the lives of Texas families. And so that means, letting go of litigation, pulling out of litigation that has been harmful, and ensuring that we build a better access to civil rights. Voting rights is going to be a big priority of mine. So dismantling his voter integrity unit, which is really a means of suppression, is going to be one of the first things I would like to do. And really building up a real civil rights division that has subdivisions that address different issues that Texans are facing. So, disability rights, LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, and really attacking all of those things, in addition to protecting consumer protection and looking into exactly what happened with our power grid and holding people accountable.
Mrs. Garza, we appreciate the time. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little more in depth now about Tuesday's elections. Turnout in both primaries, Democrat and Republican, not as high as the last midterm in 2018. And that means a small group of voters that's going to the polls has big clout. They are the ones going to decide the names on your ballot come November. So why is turnout lower than usual? Ian Mitra is someone who is looking into that question. He is the editor of the Texas Tribune, joining us from Austin. Ian, good to see you.
Great to see you.
Where are all the voters? Why aren't as many people going out to the polls right now?
Gosh, I think engagement has been very challenging. I mean, low turnout in a midterm primary is not a surprise in Texas, but it's particularly low, I think, even though we have a lot of statewide candidates on the ballot in the Republican primary. There's just been no issue or nothing that's really kind of galvanized a clear desire to get to the polls. And, the numbers are pretty low. Right now we're at just over 6% of the total, voting population in Texas actually have voted as we near the end of early voting. That's not counting mail-in ballots, of course.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's going to happen in November. I want to update our viewers about a story we talked about last week. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said he would try to end tenure for professors at UT. The university has since pushed back. Any idea what legislators might do when they return next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. As we know, for K through 12, a critical race theory kind of passed in terms of, in response to the issue that Dan Patrick is kind of raising now when it comes to universities. I think some university, leaders have kind of said that they want to protect tenure. It's very important for them because it protects against politics. And I think legislators, even the governor, has been kind of non-committal about this issue. But I think as we get closer to the legislative session in 2023, that it's going to start building up. I don't think Dan Patrick's going to let this one slow down.
Ian, we shall see. Back to you in a moment. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Coming up, 2 more Democrats running to become the state's top cop. Joe Jaworski on what he would do day one if elected. And Lee Merritt is responding to critics this morning. Plus, the countdown to the Texas primaries, who is up, who is down, and which races should you be watching Tuesday night? And have you heard what is happening in Oklahoma? It grows more medical marijuana than California and Colorado combined. And Oklahoma is far more conservative than Texas. A Republican state lawmaker from there says at its heart, marijuana should be a conservative issue. He makes his argument on the latest episode of Y'all-itics. You can listen now wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. Our next guest is Joe Jaworski, a Democrat running for Texas Attorney General. His last name might sound familiar. Joe's grandfather was Leon Jaworski, the special prosecutor in the Watergate scandal in the 70s. The younger Jaworski, though, was mayor of Galveston and is now an attorney and mediator there on the island. Mayor, thanks for being here. We appreciate that. You've got some big endorsements from the Dallas Morning News, from the Houston Chronicle as well, too. But polls show, the most recent poll we saw from UT showed that you are second behind Rochelle Garza. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know that poll is necessarily accurate. We've seen other polls that show us tied, and that was also before we did a whole lot of outreach all over the state. I think that we have a great number of Democrats running this time, Jason. And so the polls are varying widely, but I think that, number one, we have been doing this for 20 months, and on March 1st, we're going to see that come in the result.
Mayor, first day on the job, if you are elected, what is priority number one?
Well, I've been playing with a list that I call Day One, and it's got several things on it, but I can promise you this, Jason. Number one, we're going to reverse the pleadings on some of these intractable lawsuits that Mr. Paxton has brought. For example, suing on the Affordable Care Act, not under the Jaworski administration. I'll dismiss those lawsuits. I think also Senate Bill 8, the Heartbeat Act, facially unconstitutional. Roe v. Wade's the law of the land. I'll reverse that. Most importantly, I will take Ken Paxton's fake voter integrity unit and I'll turn it into General Jaworski's voter access unit.
Well, let me ask you about about Roe versus Wade, because the Supreme Court could overturn that later this year. Are there any avenues, do you think, for Texas to fight that? Because the state legislature, as you know, already has trigger laws set up to make that the law of the land here in Texas, too.
Jason, you're right. And so should that happen, first off, if Roe v. Wade is no longer viable, as we say, then I think that there's a new approach to protect reproductive rights, which would be an analysis under the Equal Protection Clause, because we know Roe v. Wade is based on the Due Process Clause, the privacy interest. If that evaporates, then there's absolutely a fairness argument under the Equal Protection Clause.
Let's say you get to the general election this November. Paxton is the Republican likely nominee. He's loaded with cash. The GOP is outraising Democrats 3-1 so far. Abbott is 10 points ahead of Beto in that latest poll. How do you compete against that?
Well, the magic is going to be that we're no longer a straight ticket voting state, Jason. And so I think that moderate Republicans who clearly agree with me that Paxton has got to go are going to be sore when their racehorse, be it George P. Bush or Justice Guzman, lose. Because I agree with you. I think Mr. Paxton will be the nominee. But come fall, those moderate Republicans, they may vote for Abbott and Patrick, but when they get to that third line, they're going to say, Ken Paxton, I remember you from the primary. I'm not supporting you. Or better yet, they may vote for the first time in their life for the Democrat, Joe Jaworski. One
of the things that you're really campaigning on is legalizing the adult use of recreational marijuana. How could you make that happen as Attorney General? That sounds like something that would need to be done legislatively.
Oh, it clearly is. But let's remember that when John Hill, a giant of Texas politics, became Attorney General, his campaign had championed something that was novel at the time, a consumer protection statute that allows individuals to sue and recover attorney's fees. Believe it or not, we didn't have that until 1973, when he was the lead witness before the Senate for the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. So it'll be the same thing with me. I agree, I can't pass the law myself, but as a statewide constitutional executive candidate, I'm making the case that we remove this wasteful petty prosecution and let's make some money, let's help our veterans, and let's let police and prosecutors fight real crime. I'll make that case before the Senate.
Good luck to you. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jason.
Lee Merritt has made a name for himself over the years representing families and victims of police brutality. George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery are among the highest profile recently. But Merritt wants to get into politics now, running to become the next Texas Attorney General. Mr. Merritt, thank you for the time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with something your opponents have made a big deal about. They say you are licensed in federal court, which records obviously show, but you're not licensed in state court. Why not?
I'm a federal civil rights attorney. I make no apologies for it. I came to Texas in particular to ensure that Texas enjoy all the citizen rights as all other Americans. It's funny, in this particular race, a lot of the Republicans have pushed back to brag about how they've sued the federal bar to deny Texans those protections. And I've been proud to stand up for Texans over the years to ensure their federal rights. And I don't do motor vehicle accident cases, divorce cases, criminal cases, just not the kind of law that I've practiced over the years.
The Attorney General in Texas doesn't have to be an attorney, but do you plan on passing the Texas bar, or at least taking the Texas bar?
Well, I benefit from what's called reciprocity, and so when I decided to run for the Texas Attorney General position, I started the process of applying for reciprocity, which means Texas will allow me to waive in after I complete a kind of thorough application. So we're going to do that, but you're right. The Texas Attorney General's office, to be clear, is that office is an executive position. So I run a firm that will include Texas attorneys. I run a firm that will include federal law, cases focused on federal law, and I'll be deciding what policy and what tax that we take. I don't plan to be actively litigating cases as the next Attorney General.
You also are licensed to practice in the state of Pennsylvania, so that would be the reciprocity you're talking about.
Yep, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and
which is one state recognizing you, and the other states usually do as well too. You've obviously made a name for yourself representing victims and their families from police brutality. Do you plan to use this position to advance that cause at all? And if so, what might that look like?
Well, absolutely. I think we saw in the cases of George Floyd how an attorney general can come in and support the work of local counties. In that case, once George Floyd was killed, the Attorney General Keith Ellison came in and gave his support to Hennepin County. I've seen that all over, most recently in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, where the Attorney General came in and said where Ahmaud and his family had been denied justice by a prosecutor who refused to do the right thing to uphold her duty of office, he brought charges against that derelict prosecutor. I think our Attorney General in Texas should be playing some of the same roles, standing up for families where additional resources are needed, identifying prosecutors who are failing to uphold their duty of office, and continuing to fight for families in that way.
Democrats obviously struggle in rural areas all across the state. What's your message to Texans who don't live in a big city, who might not know you, who wonder if you can represent them as well?
I think the Attorney General's office, number one, impacts almost every aspect of Texas life, but particularly for rural Texans, ensuring that our schools are not only properly funded and protected, but that local control is protected. Right now, the Attorney General office has proven hostile to rural communities when they want to make their own decisions concerning mask mandates, when they want to allow the curriculum to take the course that the state board advises. As a former educator, as someone who has worked with rural communities to protect our schools, the AG's office can be seen as a source for that.
Mr. Merritt, thank you for the time. Good luck.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, Texas Republicans on President Joe Biden's response to Russia. And 48 hours away from the Texas primary, the races we'll be watching when the returns start coming in.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. I am Mitra is back from the Texas Tribune in Austin. Bud Kennedy is here every week from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe is the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Let's start with you. Texas Republicans condemning, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine last week, but they were also pretty critical of President Biden's response. Who was saying what?
I mean, largely the criticism was primarily directed at Putin but there is, criticism of Biden, and their feeling is that he did not show enough strength. And, I think, as this continues to develop, I think more of the diplomatic efforts that Biden and the administration did will kind of counter that some, but that's not going to stop Republicans from questioning how, the administration acted and why we're at where we're at now. Yeah,
not at all in a midterm year. But I guess the question is it more important for voters, for conservative voters, to bash Biden or criticize Putin?
Well, I think most of the members of Congress directed their comments at Putin, which is appropriate. Then you have people like Allen West who used the opportunity to complain about how weak the president was. And if he were strong like the last president, we wouldn't have this problem. If you're on the campaign trail, you only bash Joe Biden. You don't get off into confusing people by talking about Putin.
That's a good point, Bernadine.
Yes, and it appears as if that's what some of the Republicans are doing. Not all Republicans, because keep in mind that Senator Cornyn did not blame Biden for what we're doing, but the Republicans see an advantage by bashing Biden in the upcoming elections. So that is what they're doing.
And that's what we'll likely
quit, which is not a good idea if we're going to war.
Yeah, that's a good point. Unity is something that other countries do look at. Let's talk about the Tuesday primary. We are 48 hours away. Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, 7:01, when returns start coming in. Which races are you going to be watching?
Well, you got to start at the top of the ballot. I mean, Greg Abbott in the Republican primary and Ken Paxton are facing, each has a set of challengers, and really, can these challengers break through and get to at least a runoff? That's kind of the main thing to watch. There's, it seems like Abbott and Paxton are both polling pretty strongly. So we'll see if they can make it and avoid a May runoff.
Yeah, of course, Bud, the one we're really watching is the one Ian's talking about, the Republican race for Texas Attorney General. Polls show Paxton below 50%, which means he would go into runoff. The question is, with which candidate?
Yeah, you look at the money now is not being spent in a lot of the races because people consider this like the prelims. They're going to wait and spend money in the runoffs. The places you see ads are where somebody's either trying to get over 50% or trying to get to 50% and force a runoff. You're looking at George P. Bush now probably bumping up a little bit, the one trying to force Paxton into a runoff. Will Sid Miller being a runoff. And over on the Democratic side, will Mike Collier being a runoff. Those are some of the races.
Yeah, a number of them. Bernadine, what are you watching for Tuesday night?
I'm really interested in George P. Bush. I'd like to know if Republican voters are interested in having another Bush on the ballot and voting for him. So that's my race that I'm watching. I want to see where Bush places in either runoff or no runoff. But it's just really interesting to me. And also the Sid Miller race is interesting for the agricultural commissioner. Yep. To see if they actually push him into a runoff.
Bud, do you think Sid Miller's going into a runoff, though? I mean, he was polling way above 50% when I saw the polls.
If you notice, he was, and he's an incumbent. The incumbents are doing extremely well. He's popular among the base in a small turnout election like this, but he hasn't really had support from the other Republicans on the ticket. He's probably over 50, but it just depends who votes. Yeah. We're talking about a 10% turnout, 10, 11% turnout.
Yeah, exactly what I mentioned earlier. Good deal, guys. Thank you very much. We appreciate that, and thank you for watching as always. We're back again on next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics. We'll have all the results from Tuesday night's election. We hope to see you there.